Welcome to day 14 of the 30-day Bible reading plan. We're going to look at a text in Isaiah. So we've kind of jumped now from the historical narrative portions of Scripture, and now we're into the prophetic literature. And we've set this up with the way that we see the disobedience cycles in Israel, their desire for a king, and the king's failures. And we've looked at some of the major covenants. Those are all really important. Here in Isaiah 5, we get this strong picture of judgment. So let's take a look at it. Isaiah 5 begins with this image. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked for it to yield grapes. So here was the expectation. He does all of this work of planting and preparing, and he expects grapes. Let's see what happens. But the end of verse 2 there, it yielded wild. This word really means something like sour, might even be a better translation, wild grapes. So the expectation is unmet. The vineyard does not produce the grapes that this farmer expected. Now, Isaiah says, my beloved. Of course, he's talking about the Lord here, and that's going to be clear. So that's the metaphor, right? There's the Lord making a vineyard, and he puts all of his time and effort into it, and he looks for it to yield good fruit, and it yields bad fruit. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? So the Lord has done everything. When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And so it hasn't done what you would expect it to do. And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. And here comes the judgment. I will remove its hedge. It shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. Notice, I've mentioned this before, but it's always helpful as a reminder. This Hebrew poetry is always parallel, which is part of the reason you have these indents here that tell you these two lines go together. So 1 and 2, 1 and 2. Just notice the parallel. I will break down its wall. It shall be trampled down. I will remove its hedge. So we'll see that as we go throughout, but that's helpful to know. And sometimes it can have sort of the 3 level ones to kind of see. That's the idea here in verse 6. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. What's interesting here about these briars and thorns are that reference most likely to Genesis 3 and the curses on Adam, that he'll work the ground and it will produce briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain, no rain upon it. So no rain. You can't have good grapes. You can't have a vineyard without rain. And then we're going to get an explanation here in verse 7 of what exactly this poetic metaphor is all about. Let's try something else here. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. So Israel is what we're talking about, are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice. This is the Hebrew word mishpat. But behold, bloodshed. The Hebrew word mishpach. So you can hear the wordplay there. He looked for justice. Justice is this idea of how we relate to each other. And instead, he's finding this sort of violence or bloodshed. So the contrast is between a right relationship between each other and then this one of conflict and mistreatment of each other. So a wordplay there between these two parallel lines, though. That's what I wanted to point out to you. For righteousness, sadakah, but behold, an outcry. Let me take a look here. I forget the word, but there is a wordplay. Sa'akah. So you've got sadakah for righteousness, and then this outcry word sounds a lot like it, sa'akah. And again, this sort of parallel lines here. So it looked for this righteousness, which is very similar to justice. It has to do with right relationship between God and man, following Torah, following the law, following God's advisements, things like what Jesus teaches: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That pretty much summarizes the law, and the rest are just details on how that works out. But instead, what we're finding is the opposite of that. So we're finding violence, which isn't just murder and things like that, but the opposite of justice, and this outcry, which is just this upheaval, this chaos or something like that. Now, I want to just kind of go quickly here to show you one more piece here in verse 13, and then you can read the rest of chapter 5 for yourself. Therefore, my people go into exile for lack of knowledge. Their honored men go hungry, and their multitude is parched with thirst. So they go into exile because they have not really known the Lord. Therefore, Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure, and the nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude will go down, her revelers and he who exults in her. A man is humbled, and each one is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are brought low. Major theme, by the way, in Isaiah and all the prophets, that those who would place themselves above the Lord are being brought down. See, the Lord is exalted. There's a contrast here between the eyes of the haughty. Man is humbled, and the Lord is exalted. They are brought low, and the Lord is exalted. And he's exalted in justice. So his justice is a good thing. Is not a bad thing. The holy God shows himself holy in righteousness. And again, these words go back to that section we just read. Even though the Lord couldn't find righteousness and justice among his people, he is now bringing it to bear. And the result is that the lambs graze as in their pasture, and nomads shall eat among the ruins of the rich. So the Lord is going to set things right. So this judgment. Now, there is this one other piece that I should show you just as kind of an addendum to this, and that's in Isaiah chapter 11. So you've got this vineyard that's been destroyed. But then in Isaiah 11, we read this: there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. So imagine this vineyard that's just been burnt to the ground, and there's this shoot, this branch that pops up, giving just this little sprig of hope, because it's going to bear fruit. And it's not a branch at all, it's a person. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of knowledge, and his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see. You see, this is going to be that perfect ruler we've been anticipating all along. It's going to bring peace. Isaiah 11 is really worth reading with Isaiah 5. 5's the negative. 11 is how the Lord's going to restore all of this. And then here, in that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a signal for the peoples, the nation. So these two words are kind of synonymous. They will inquire of him, and his resting place shall be glorious. He's going to be exalted over all the nations. So it's a really amazing promise here of how God is going to judge, but he's going to bring renewal through that judgment. So take a look at Isaiah 5, take a look at Isaiah 11, and tomorrow we'll look at Isaiah 52 and 53 and see how Isaiah tells us about this root of Jesse and exactly what he's going to accomplish. We'll see you tomorrow.